Good evening. Um, I welcome you all in the panel discussion on today's panel discussion on scope of technology development and entrepreneurship in climate studies. On behalf of climate studies, I welcome you all. And at the same time, I'm really sorry for the initial technical glitch because of this program got delayed by 25 minutes. I'm really sorry about that. So at the outset, I'd like to thank each and every esteemed panelist and the moderators for accepting our invitation and agreeing to have a discussion on this specific topic on scope for technology development and entrepreneurship in climate studies. Um, before starting before starting the panel discussion, I'd like to give a brief introduction about our program, which is on interdisciplinary program on climate studies at IIT Bombay. I'd like to mention that it's a full-fledged academic PhD program in IIT Bombay, and this is the first PhD academic program in climate change in this country. This program started with the seed fund received from Department of Science and Technology SPLICE with the support and guidance from Dr. Akhilesh Gupta, who was leading this division in Department of Science and Technology. And we started in 2012, and over the last 8 years, there was a tremendous growth in IDP climate studies. And at this moment, we have 60 plus PhD students. And at this moment also, we have 33 associate faculty members who are participating from different departments. So the idea of IDP climate studies is that this is fully an interdisciplinary program. And we always make sure that any PhD student who has joined in IDP climate studies, they have supervisors and co-supervisors from two different departments, so that we can actually maintain the interdisciplinarity in any of the PhD areas. And over this time, actually, there was we are actually doing quite good in terms of research front, and we have been publishing in many of the high impact journals, as for example, Nature Climate Change, Nature Sustainability, Nature Communications, Science Advances, PNAS, Geophysical Research Letter, Remote Sensing of Environment, and so on. So in that way, on research front, we are doing quite well. And but one of the things which came through some discussion with some of our students is that we are still not doing very well in terms of having startups and entrepreneurship in climate studies, or in terms of more or less like kind of sort of developing technologies and then converting into startups. So this part we are still not doing very well. And then we thought of really having a discussion. So on this matter also, we had a discussion with Dr. Akhilesh Gupta, of who is heading the SPLICE of Department of Science and Technology, and who has always been supporting our academic program. And we have realized that in India we have been we are doing actually quite well in terms of new startups, incubations, and in terms of creating a very good environment for new startups. But if you are considering the number of startups in climate, they are actually very few. And we feel that it is our responsibility to really generate or really can set up a new environment so that your young innovators will get interested in terms of creating setting up new startups and entrepreneurship activities in this climate area. So that's the purpose of this panel discussion, and what we are thinking that this is the first step from where we'll go forward, and we'll take all of your support, help, and guidance in terms of we'll try to create an environment so that our younger students will really get interested in creating in setting up startups, entrepreneurship, and technology development. So thank you all, and sorry again for the technical glitch because of which the this program got delayed. And thank you. Now over to Professor Chandra. I'll just like to introduce both of our moderators, Professor Chandra Venkatraman, who was the founding convener of climate studies and also a faculty member of chemical engineering, and Professor Sridhar Balasubramaniam, who is also associate faculty member of climate studies, and he is a faculty member of mechanical engineering department. Over to you, Professor Chandra.
Thank you, Professor Ghosh. Thank you very much for the nice introduction to our interdisciplinary program, and also for setting the context for today's panel discussion, on the scope for technology development and entrepreneurship in climate studies. To many of us, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change of 2015 was a great step forward. We now had almost universal agreement on climate change targets, including the 1.5-degree goal. Importantly, we had an opportunity for countries to come forward at their own initiative. There were no fixed country-based targets that were mandated. However, countries were free to make their own pledges on how they will contribute to reaching the global climate target. And these pledges would be subject to continuous evolving review. So there was a pledge and review cycle, so they could be updated as we went forward. But most importantly, perhaps, an opportunity was there to share responsibility and stimulate bottom-up initiatives, and where it was explicitly recognized that local and regional governments are key partners, together with business enterprises and civil society, in addressing and providing solutions to climate change. So we are now moving towards the development of an ecosystem that enables distributed local and regional actions in and specifically those related to technology development and entrepreneurship. So one of the key mandates of the IDP in climate studies, other than science and the study of impacts, was to enable fashioning of effective response, including technology and adaptation. And that is the focus of the panel discussion today. Some questions come to mind. I'm sure there are several others, but I'll just put these out. Which sectors present technological innovation opportunities? Perhaps the best ones or the most important ones for climate? How might scientific tools be spun off from our research programs that we conduct in the IDP? What educational themes may be introduced to support this idea of entrepreneurship and technology development? And perhaps also, what are the key elements of climate positive business models? How might we make the current incubator accelerator models better suited to the innovation of climate technologies? So these were some of the thoughts I just wanted to put forward. And without any further ado, I request my colleague, Professor Sridhar Balasubramaniam, to now introduce our distinguished panelists and to take us into the panel discussion. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you all. Thank you, Shubhimal and Chandra, for the initial introductions. We have a very eminent group of panelists today, and I'm sure I can talk a lot about them, but given the restriction in time, I'll just give a very brief introduction of all the panel members, the 6 panel members that we have today. And then we can jump right into the discussion, because I'm sure all the attendees are awaiting to hear from the panel experts. So to start with, I will first introduce Dr. Akhilesh Gupta. He received his PhD in atmospheric sciences from IIT Delhi. And we know him very well because he has worked with leading organizations such as IMD, the National Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasting, the Disaster Management Cell of DST during the years 1985 to 2007. He has been very actively contributing to the area of weather dynamics and climate change. And he was also the advisor to the Union Minister for Science and Technology and Earth Sciences between 2007 to 2009. He has published a lot of papers and books related to climate science, and his contributions have been very useful for the Indian context. So I welcome you, Dr. Akhilesh Gupta, to this panel discussion. So next we have Mrs. Amita Sharma, who is the formal additional secretary for MHRD, Government of India. Uh, Mrs. Sharma was employed in the Indian Administrative Service, and her core professional experience is in the areas of social development policies and programs, particularly related to education, social protection, growth, and sustainable development. She has been very instrumental in formulating the Madhya Pradesh Education Guarantee Scheme, a rights-based scheme for universalizing basic education. And for that, she won the Commonwealth Gold Award for, for the best global innovation in public service in 1998. So her work on literacy in the state of Madhya Pradesh has also won her many accolades, and she has been very active for the women in public affairs area. So I think she will also talk about those during the panel discussion. So welcome, Mrs. Amita Sharma. Next up, we have Professor Auroop Ganguly, who is the Director of Sustainability and Data Science Lab, and also a professor in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at Northeastern University in Boston, USA. So by profession, he's a hydrologist and civil engineer, and he received his he's a visiting professor of computer science and environmental sciences at IIT Kharagpur. He's also the co-founder and chief scientific advisor of a startup which is called Risk. And he also, with his former PhD student, they have done a lot of work related to climate risk and climate resilience. So he's also a member of the UN Environmental Program Review Panel and the lead author of the Artificial Intelligence section of the upcoming Sustained National Climate Assessment of the United States. He has extensively published in top interdisciplinary journals such as Nature, PNAS, Nature Climate Change, and many others. And his specialization is in hydrometeorology and hydroclimate, climate and weather extremes, and how resilient can we get when it comes to weather and climate. So I welcome you, Professor Ganguly. Then we have Dr. Amir Bazaz, who is the senior lead practice at Indian Institute of Human Settlements. He has a PhD in management from IIM Ahmedabad with a specialization in public systems. He works on issues which interconnect economics, climate change mitigation and adaptation, and as well as sustainable development. He has vast experience in working with various integrated assessment framework and modeling arrangements. His current research interests are in the low carbon society, infrastructure, climate change adaptation and mitigation, with a specific focus on the urban climate change aspect. Welcome, Mr. Amir Bazaz. Then we have Mr. Jatin Singh, who is the managing director of Skymet Weather Services Private Limited. So he founded Skymet Weather Services, which is a pioneering weather forecast and agri-tech company. In the past few years, they have also taken up artificial intelligence and machine learning and remote sensing technologies to improve the weather predictive capability. And they have also been helping farmers with financial risk assessment and also agri-insurance. In the present role, Mr. Singh is in charge of the overall growth strategy of the company, technology innovation, and the operation and business aspects. He's also the founder of Gram Cover, a technology-based insurance distribution business in rural India. And they have been providing weather services for all the states in India since 2004. Welcome, Mr. Jatin Singh. And lastly, but not the least, we have Dr. Aditi Mukherji, who is a principal researcher at International Water Management Institute in India. Having received her PhD from Cambridge University in UK, where she was a Gates Cambridge Scholar, she has been working as principal researcher at the International Water Management since then. And prior to that, she led the water and air theme of International Center for Integrated Mountain Development in Nepal. She has extensive experience of over 18 years working on policies and institutions of water resource management with a special focus on water, energy, food nexus, which is, I think, the next big thing where a lot of interest lies for common people as well as for farmers. So with that, I would like to welcome all the panelists, including Dr. Mukherji. And now we can open up the session for panel discussion. I will request Professor Chandra Venkat Ramanan to start the first question, and then we will alternate between us.
Thank you, Sridhar. May I request all our panelists to please turn on their videos? It would be nice for the audience to be able to see us. So panelists may please turn on videos. Okay, great. Thank you very much. So I'd like, on my personal behalf, to welcome you all, and also on behalf of the IDP in Climate Studies. We're very happy to have such a distinguished set of panelists with us today. And we tried to set up a set of questions across these domains that we had talked about. So let me just start this by saying that, you see, examples of climate innovation range from rural microsolar to urban building energy conservation to data science-based tools for climate services, and eventually to enhancing resource efficiency and circularity in all production processes in order to go towards green production. So with this kind of background, may I request Professor Akhilesh, Dr. Akhilesh Gupta and Dr. Aditi Mukherji to respond. In your opinion, what are some of the pressing issues for India related to climate science and policy, which demand new technologies and innovations?
Thank you, Chandra. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible, yes.
Thank you. So how much time I have for this intervention?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So, I think first of all, let me thank IIT Bombay, especially Chandra Venkatraman and Shubhimal for taking this kind of initiative. And I think this is going to be interesting discussion. So let me put that question in a slightly different way. So let me start with the background. I think Chandra has already given that background, but let me elaborate a bit on that, and then I will come to the question. So we India submitted the nationally determined contribution to UNFCCC in 2015, and as per this NDC, in fact, India was estimated to get the financing to the tune of 2.5 trillion from 2015 to 2030. But so far, India got less than a billion. Now, despite that finance that was, not provided from international sources, India did tremendously well in terms of, good adaptation and mitigation actions. So in terms of adaptation, in fact, in the area of, say, agriculture, in the area of water, the health, environment, all these areas have done well. And the DST has contributed our centers of excellence and major R&D program, network program. We have more than 200 projects, contributing to these adaptation areas in a big way, and we have large number of papers in last 5 years still. We have something like 1,500 research papers in the high impact factor journals. And so similarly in the area of mitigation, there has been tremendous progress, and this is unprecedented. Our energy intensity has increased, has decreased by 21% between 2005 and 2014, whereas the estimated is that we will reduce to say 20-25% by 2020 and 33 to 35% by 2030. So, and even the renewable energy, in fact, we made tremendous progress. Our target was to achieve 20 gigawatt of solar energy by 22. We achieved this in 2018 itself, and now we are targeting 175 gigawatt by 2022. Also, India's track was very good. In fact, the India climate change tracker, as per the UNSCC, has been that we are well within 2 degrees centigrade target by end of the century. Now, having this kind of track record, in fact, a recent report says that India is one of the only 6 countries in the G20 which is on track to meet the NDC commitments. In fact, so much of initiative that we have taken. For example, we adopted renewable energy programs, electric vehicle programs, similarly Swachh Bharat mission, so sanitation and ban on plastic, similarly clean cooking under the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, and then energy efficiency and development under the PAT program, where LED market and star rating under the, and also the program under the Unnat Jyoti for affordable LED and appliances that's called Ujjwala Yojana, and so much under the National Action Plan and even India Cooling Action Plan, India Solar Alliance, and so many others. Now, having and also in addition to what government has done, in fact, private businesses have done so much. See, today, in fact, India's cement industry is now the greenest in the world. India renewable energy is the cheapest in the world. And India, some of the banks like Yes Bank and SBI, they are extending so much of domestic capital to meet green financing. Tata and Mahindra have come up with electric vehicles.
Gupta, I'm sorry I didn't initially mention this. If you could give your comments in another 1 minute. And
I asked that question that whether how much time I am supposed to.
Sorry, that was 5 minutes was what we had planned.
Okay, let me come to the end of the thing. So let me now coming to the issue of how what is the scope for innovation and startup in this area. So I think as Subimal has started in the beginning itself, we have now, in fact, the startup India has something like 41,000 startups in the country, and S&T led startups are around 3,500. But the climate related startups are very less in number, and so therefore, and there are so much scope in the area of solar. In fact, batteries for the solar is very, very important. India yet to have the batteries for this, so in this climate. Also, in the EV, that big issue about the battery, motors and power electronics. Lithium-ion batteries are not relevant now, going to become outdated. So we need sodium-ion batteries. So there's so much scope for startup to pitch in to some of these areas, and therefore the opportunity, in fact, is huge in the area, and we can, in fact, this is perhaps the right opportune time when we have started this, and this the DST has a program called Nidhi, which is already working in the area of startup in the S&T. We have something like 153 incubators in the country, technology business incubator. One of them is in IIT Bombay itself. That's called SIGN, Society for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. We are going to start a new program called Prof, and this is to create distributed, thematic, and virtual startup in the country. So the scope for going forward with this thematic startup and incubation is going to be very important in the time to come. So anyway, I'm sorry, this question I asked in the beginning, that how much time I have. I don't know idea about time that is allocated for each panelist. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. I should have mentioned that earlier. Dr. Aditi Mukherji, your thoughts on some of the pressing issues for India related to climate science and policy that demand new technologies and innovation. And it's about 5 minutes.
Yeah,
so thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me to this very excellent discussion. And I was listening very carefully to Dr. Gupta, and I completely agree that India has done very well in terms of mitigation, but it's just to put in perspective that the challenges are huge. In my role as an IPCC author, what is just coming up very clearly is that we are almost certainly to miss the 1.5 degree target. I mean, it's very, very certain that we are not on track for 1.5 degree. And some of the challenges, and for India, what matters somehow, the sector that matters and is getting the most affected is really agriculture, because that's where majority of our people are parked. That's where majority of the people are employed, underemployed, whatever you say. GDP wise, yes, it's relatively smaller, but in terms of, if you look at issues of equity, justice, all those kind of issues, then agriculture is a major sector. So I feel that reducing emissions and also the part about agriculture is the dependence, like the huge dependence on irrigation to grow our crops. I mean, it's just as I think our mitigation targets similarly in the 70s. What we did with our agricultural production is also in some ways phenomenal, right? I mean, we have these millions of farmers with sub-acre land sizes together growing 300 million metric tons of food. From a situation when we were written off as a basket case of poverty and malnutrition, etc. So that's been a huge contribution that our farmers have made, but in doing so, they have been very much dependent on irrigation, and our irrigation sector itself is one of the most energy intensive. When you look at the energy intensity of other countries in terms of agriculture, somehow irrigation is not a part. I mean, maybe 2 to 5% of the total energy even is consumed by agriculture and almost nothing by irrigation. India is different because we are using almost 250 cubic kilometers of groundwater, the largest in the world. We have 20 million wells and tube wells. Nobody comes closer to these numbers. So I feel that decarbonizing irrigation sector and agriculture, because within agriculture also irrigation is a big player in terms of carbon footprint. And there, I think there is a lot of scope for private sector participation and entrepreneurship. Solar irrigation pumps comes to mind, and a lot of innovations have happened. There is a government scheme of Kusum. So those pumps are there, but then there are other innovations needed in terms of remote operation. I mean, what do you do with those panels after the lifetime of those pumps are over? So I would just put reducing emissions from agriculture and irrigation as one of our top priorities. Then I think the other part is also a lot of the climate change. The way people experience climate change on a day-to-day basis is through water. So our farmers are experiencing floods and droughts, and these are becoming, we're already seeing evidence that farmers are adapting in terms of different varieties of seeds. They're changing their sowing dates, their harvesting dates, etc. And a lot of the negative impacts are coming from these, these hazard events of floods and droughts. So I would feel the technological investments in things like early warning systems or systems for informing farmers about, these kind of weather events would be quite important. And finally, related to that is better agricultural services, including end-to-end. I mean, many of those would require transformative adaptation. Where we are stuck is mostly incremental adaptation, changing things here and there. So I think also moving our farming population to better livelihoods also would require that they're able to invest their surpluses, if they have any, into education. So I think working towards increasing farmers' surplus, and if technology can help there, that would be wonderful. So that's I mean, I would focus on agriculture and water, and a lot on the technology, and serve in the service of farmers. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you, Dr. Aditi Mukherji. And now over to Sridhar to take over for the next questions. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Chandra. And yeah, those are some really interesting thoughts that have been provided by Dr. Gupta and Dr. Mukherji. And I think that sets up the right platform for the next few questions that we are going to discuss. So the next question is for Mr. Jatin Singh and Mrs. Amita Sharma. So we are, I mean, there is no question that we are warming at an alarming rate, and mainly the carbon emissions are at an all-time high, and it seems like it is going to increase in the future, maybe at the same rate or beyond that. That is what the trend looks like. We are seeing some freak events which are now the new normal. I don't have to point it out to you, to all of you. I am pretty sure that we are all experiencing freak events. If you see, last year we had cyclones which are intensifying just before coming to the land, and every year is warmer than the previous year. So there is a need to address this issue. So could you both talk about the role of new startups and how some technology innovations in India can be used to combat the global warming scenario, and thereby ensuring resilience as well as sustainability? So maybe I would request Mr. Sharma to or Mr. Jatin, whoever wants to go first, and you have 5 minutes each. Thank you.
Mr. Sharma, please go ahead. Mr. Sharma, I'll go second. I'm waiting for Mr. Sharma.
You can. Yes, maybe you can go first, Mrs. Sharma, and then followed by Mr. Jatin Singh.
Well, I'm going to come from a very different angle altogether, which might sort of derail your conversation entirely. I would not. I come from a public policy and community background, where we've looked for opportunities for mainstreaming and integrating climate change concerns into behavioral practices of largely very poor communities. And some insights from this, I wouldn't really start with what kind of startups we need. I think what kind of policies do we need that actually impact those communities that are the most affected. I mean, they contribute the least carbon footprints, but they are impacted the most. And I'm going to give one example of a feasible partnership between public policy, research and knowledge institutions, and technology innovations. And then conclude by suggesting some areas where entrepreneurs, whether they are knowledge entrepreneurs or technology entrepreneurs or public policy entrepreneurs, can possibly find a way to address some of these concerns in a manner that is, first of all, legible, affordable, and creates a level playing field, does not sacrifice the poorest people's short, medium, long-term gains for those who need to be making those compromises. So with this as a background, I'm going to give an example of the work we did when I was, as an example, when I was Joint Secretary in REGA, and we worked with ISC Bangalore, and then later on, after I retired, I am currently with IPA Global, and we worked at IIT Bombay, in fact, Subimal, and I'm very happy, Subimal, that that possibly a little memory of the work we did together, where technology and research can impact very poor communities, must have stayed with you for you to want to invite me at all to this panel. with in RHBA, we were working with natural resources conservation for the poorest people. So the idea here was, how do you measure their environmental benefits and how do you measure the efficacy of their adaptation practices? And Professor Ravina undertook this study, and it's from IIT Bangalore, and has come up with very rich data published in the EPW. You can access it there. On our very simple, what he calls fail-safe methods, can actually charge water, improve soil, especially the soil organic carbon, and lead to a huge sequestration, carbon sequestration on account of increase in forestry cover. Based on what Professor Ravi did there, we went on. I retired to work with IPE Global, which is a private organization. We worked with the University of Manchester and IIT Bombay, both. And in this capacity, we were doing Shabhankar and Sulima from IIT Bombay and Professor Richards from Manchester to do vulnerability mapping in 300 really drought-stricken, blocks in 5 arid districts, and then came up with, and then after that, connectivity issues. So I'll just continue with the audio. So then we came up with a huge evidence-based research data to be presented to government right at the bottom level. Somebody earlier spoke about local bodies, and I think that's not to be forgotten, because that's where you have to do advocacy and communication. And do that with data which they may not immediately identify with. But we were able to do that because we worked with technology innovation institutes, and with their study could come up with both vulnerability maps as well as very simple apps that a sarpanch or a farmer or a labor can actually use to plan what kind of works is he going to have. There are a lot of data gaps in it, but then that's part of the challenge. So that was, and it has got mainstreamed in policy. So evidence plus technical design, communication, education, policy support are some very important areas to be able to penetrate solutions down to where they really matter. And if startups can start looking at that, as you say, the portion at the bottom of the pyramid, they might come up with very good ideas. One more point I'll make, and then I'll stop there. The other area that I think that is worth looking at is the peri-urban metamorphosis in the hilly areas, where on account of soil erosion and rapid deforestation, despite government policies, I mean, if you go down to the semi-urban areas, they're a mess. Not only because of issues like deforestation, but also on account of a whole lot of urban waste that is being streamed down there. And there is no way in which these local bodies actually have either technology or finance. These default self-financing mechanisms, so they're at a loss. Tourists come, dump their stuff, go back and leave eroded hills. So all the water is clogged, roots are eroded, and you have disasters. This is an area nobody has looked at. It needs study. There isn't even enough data on this, on the impact of the hills becoming a conduit for urban population waste. And there's a huge scope there for helping local bodies with frugal innovations and self-financing mechanisms. So I'll stop here at the moment, and not to overrun my time, and hope that I can join the discussion later.
Thank you, Sharma. So now over to Mr. Jatin.
Sorry, laptop collapsed. Sorry. As you know, when it comes to opportunities in global warming and climate change, if you really ask me, I define that into 3 areas. First is sensing. This country is under-sensed, and as this becomes as global warming and climate change become national security issues, what we need is sensing. When we talk about sensing, I'm talking about everything from terrestrial sensing, air pollution sensing, water and ocean sensing, and even CubeSats, privately made CubeSats for Earth observation systems. I think we're highly under-observed because you cannot model if you cannot observe properly. The second thing that comes out of these observations in a classical meteorological universe is forecasting. Forecasting technologies have improved. Now you can use a lot of AIML techniques to do what are typical meteorologists and optic issues, especially for NatCat short-term forecasts. And also because we're closer to the equator, our precipitation forecast to 10 to 15 days is actually quite good, and our monsoon forecasts are also very good going up for a season. I think that as we collect more and more parameters, I think there is an opportunity. The problem in this country and in this world is people don't tend to pay for forecasts, but nonetheless there's an opportunity. And the third one that comes on top of this is financial instruments like insurance, like credit, like NatCat insurance are all based on that data. And there is an opportunity for multiple players in each and every layer. Initially, it's going to be focused, I think, on 3 areas where you'll find buyers. Single biggest buyer in this stage is still going to be government or government-related entities. They are the ones who actually are head-on dealing with climate change. The second set of is going to be banks and insurance companies, especially ones that are working in agriculture. And the third set is going to be power, especially renewable energy. And as the Central Electricity Act, I think 2014 now, the new one is coming in, and if discoms get privatized, then there's going to be a tremendous amount of demand for these services, both from an instrumentation point of view and analysis point of view, and financial engineering point of view. Thank you.
So thank you for these interesting perspectives. So we'll move on to another question, and this one is for Professor Auroop Ganguly and for Dr. Amir Bazaz. The role of science and technology is indispensable when we start talking about climate solutions. So could you elaborate on some of the existing technologies, or in a broader sense, the existing solutions and upcoming scientific innovations in this area, both in the global context as well as that relevant to India? Professor Ganguly, would you go first? And 5 minutes, if that's okay.
Thank you so much, Chandra. And I'd like to echo everyone here. It's a pleasure to be here. So one thing I'd like to just mention about climate and global warming is that intellectually we may be losing a bit of focus occasionally when we talk about, what is the breadth and depth of this problem. So just to make sure that we understand what we mean here, it's a broad definition of climate change adaptation mitigation. And the reason I'm saying this is because I've often heard people saying, there are these floods in Mumbai or Kolkata, and climate change, dealing with climate change, reducing greenhouse gas emissions will stop that. Maybe some of that, part of that. But the fact that infrastructures are bad will not be directly addressed by reducing greenhouse gases. So it's important to understand that. I think many of the panelists here have mentioned that. Where this comes through in terms of the question that Chandra, you are asking is when we think about technologies and solutions for this big climate change problem, it's not just technologies and solutions about carbon mitigation, which is important, but it's also technologies and solutions about, I think, Professor or Dr. Aditi Mukherji was already mentioning about adaptation, whether it's in the context of water or infrastructures and things of that nature. So from that perspective, I would say there are a couple of ways to organize some of these technologies. One is the way typically that climate scientists and researchers and practitioners self-organize themselves. One is in the, the scientific basis, adaptation, which has been called avoiding the unmanageable, and mitigation, which is managing the unavoidable. And I would say in terms of the science and technology that exists, while I agree that many of the issues do relate to transformational adaptation, as one of the panelists was mentioning, in the context of India, given resource constraints, there may also be scope for low regrets adaptation. There are a variety of tools, solutions, methods that have come up both in the urban sector, such as in the context of emergency preparedness infrastructures, and in the rural sector, such as in the context of what may be valuable to farmers. I would like to take a little bit of a different stab when it comes to prediction and forecasting. I would say while it's important to talk about forecasting natural systems, whether it's weather, whether it's seasonal climate, it's also important to talk about or to think about products that could address the interfaces between complex natural and human systems. So if we think about farmer suicides, just as an example, I mean, which is sort of, it's really, really bad that these kind of things are still happening. And it will, if we just look at greenhouse gas emissions, global warming, that's important, but that's not the only thing, as we all know. And there are technologies ranging from networks to agent-based systems to forecasting systems, all of which need to be brought to bear to address these problems. So different solutions exist for adaptation across multiple sectors, for mitigation, to address the science, to do risk framing and understand through cost-benefit analysis where and how these technologies should be prioritized. We have to think of the problem first and develop solutions accordingly instead of the usual hammer and nail problem. There may be something to be said for there is a need, maybe the solutions are often fragmented, and there may be a need to evangelize and bring some of these things together. So I'll just stop with just one thing, that we have to be careful about not making climate the new God, in the sense that many of us are familiar with that Bollywood movie, Oh My God, where in the insurance sector, they blamed everything on God, and hence we don't need to do anything. Climate and global warming are extremely important, but it's not only about greenhouse gas emissions, which will stop everything. So climate cannot become the new God. We have to still work on infrastructures, farming, water sector, all the things that we just heard from others in this panel. Thank you, Chandra.
Thank you, Auroop. Now over to Dr. Amir Bazaz, please. Your comments on the role of scientific innovations and technologies.
Yes, good evening and good morning to, I think people are in different time zones, but I hope I am audible. Yeah. Am I audible?
Yeah, it's a little bit low on volume and clarity.
Just a minute. Am I audible better?
Yeah, it's better now.
Okay. Sorry, I think there was some volume problem, but very happy to be here talking about these issues. So I'll basically follow Professor Ganguly's approach and not be very prescriptive about specific solutions, because these are very dynamic issues. What I'll basically talk about are three things. I think as we know the path to climate action, or the scaffolding that holds climate action together. So we know we need to adapt, and we know we need to mitigate. I think the most fundamental challenge is to bring in development into this narrative. How strongly or how effectively we are able to use these opportunities to address a lot of challenges that we face on the employment, on basic services, housing infrastructure, etc., etc. So I think at the framing level, that's a very important and a fundamental question. I'd like to talk about two important things separately on the mitigation and adaptation, from a mitigation and adaptation point of view. On the mitigation side, we of course know that there are a lot of solutions available. There's an option space that is fairly vibrant and also mature. What we kind of lack a little bit is to use those opportunities to think about a larger transformation of the ecosystem. For example, if there is an intervention around EV, can we look at employment transition through the EV lens. I think that's a very critical challenge that we are facing, and I think we have a lot of opportunity, and we can definitely transform. On the adaptation side, and I think, and I echo my previous panelists' comments given by previous panelists, adaptation space is a little less serviced, and I think there's phenomenal opportunity there. But the challenge there is to identify the solution, what kind of offering we think of, and how that offering is kind of aligned with needs, and how we can use that opportunity to create some kind of a viable market, so to speak. So adaptation space becomes very important, and needless to say, land-based or ecosystem-based opportunities become a very critical element there, as Aditi also pointed out. Water becomes very important in that story. And
I'm wondering if you could speak a little closer to the mic. If you could just move the mic closer to you. Yeah.
Is it better now?
Oh,
better?
It's a lot better. It's a lot better. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. So I'll not repeat, of course, for lack of time, but we can take it in Q&A later. I think, and what I think the challenge that I see from my work and my research is that so we are not talking about some kind of technology-driven transition. We are talking about, as Professor Ganguly also mentioned, we are attempting to transform something, and therefore the transformation is not about only in the ability to develop some kind of a solution, but it's also about society, it's also about governance, and it's also about institutions. And I think that's where much of the opportunity lies. And I'll end by giving two aspects to this kind of an idea. One is that, okay, how from a pedagogical point of view, that what can we do in universities and colleges? And I think the challenge there is that, and from an interdisciplinary perspective, is to basically understand what the problem is in a multi-layered context, and then move on from there to kind of looking and developing solutions that are rooted in the context that we are facing. We probably need a lot of work on that front. Second, I think we also miss the bus in terms of looking at the climate problem from a pure technical fix perspective. And I'll give two examples there. I did some work in North Karnataka where I studied farmers in drylands. And one of the most critical challenges that they faced was access to knowledge. Now, this is not about, it's about brokering knowledge from between the two entities. And there are a host of opportunities that kind of exist in this space. And so that's one thing. And so there's an opportunity. There's a lot of adaptation deficit there, and there's a lot of potential in terms of well-being outcomes. The third is in terms of cities. For example, I looked at a few cities in Northeast India and tried to understand how do we kind of build resilience within communities and people. And so, people there in some of these Northeast places that cities, these were urban centers, were very vibrant in terms of their potential to contribute towards their own well-being and societal well-being. The only thing that was deterring them from entering into the marketplace was lack of capital, and because they were not bankable. Now, and when I dug deeper, I realized that they were not able. I went to banks and to financial institutions and asked them, how do we address this problem? And the simple asked from them was that, look, they are unable to write a proper proposal. Now that's a very simple low-hanging fruit. They don't know about cash flows, they don't know about revenues, but they are entrepreneurial. They have a lot of potential, and they are willing to innovate. But we are just not able to let them participate in the marketplace. So I'll end here, and I look forward to further discussions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So it seems as if we have a great deal of perhaps need to bring in governance aspects and others into the curriculum, as well as we already have research, but perhaps in more formal ways. So over to you, Sridhar, for the next question.
Yeah, thank you. We will, I think we have heard a good deal on the technological aspect as well as the entrepreneurial aspect in this area. So now I would like to maybe ask a slightly different question, and this is to Dr. Akhilesh Gupta and and Mrs. Amita Sharma. So you are aware that we have a curriculum at IIT Bombay, which is which is focusing on climate science and policy. So keeping that as a kind of a benchmark, we are wondering what kind of curriculum would you suggest for academics, let us say for government as well as private institutes? What kind of curriculum should be there to become an entrepreneur or to encourage entrepreneurship in the field of climate science and policy? So if Dr. Akhilesh Gupta, you can start. Answer. I mean, that would be.
Thank you, Sridhar. I think this is very, very important question. You know that in India, the innovation at the curriculum level start very late. We start innovation only after the R&D. And you see the university structure and the even the institution of national importance structure actually do not promote the entrepreneurship and innovation at at the level of the curriculum. Now, and that is the reason why, see, I think most of the universities in the country, they work at very low TRL, only TRL 1 to 3 or so. IITs do much better, at least they connect to the industry at the technology development stage itself. But still, even at IIT level, the innovation is not part of the curriculum per se. Now, how do we do it, and how do we take it forward and bring innovation right at the early education stage? So, in fact, both National Education Policy and Science and Technology Innovation Policy, which is going to come up very shortly, are actually strongly recommending for innovation to be part of every academic institution in the country. There are two ways of doing it. If you put it as a part of the curriculum at the undergraduate and graduate level, then I mean, it can take forward, but people feel that even at that level it is little late. So in fact, the education policy has recommended that we must bring innovation right at the school education level. Same is the case with the science and technology innovation policy. Now, even innovation is also very, I mean, it is of different kinds. So, for example, if you look at the inclusive innovation, India is in fact a leader in inclusive innovation. So, after the estimate, India in fact is doing better than China. But we have some gray area. For example, the grassroots innovation. We have a large number of grassroots innovators and nearly 1,50,000 innovators are already registered with the NIF. But the big problem that these innovators face, and that is the case with not only with innovators, even with researchers, is that they do not have market connect, and that market connect need to be created for and through the universities and national institution. These connect need to be created. So it is very clear that innovator to researcher to the market, there is a disconnect today, and this is a big area where the we can contribute from the government, but also the academician, or I would say there need to be a good connect between the government, R&D institution, academic institution, and industry. This cannot be done by one single entity. Also, I just end my this thing by saying this, that this is an area where government has been very serious. There is so much opportunity that going to come up as part of the policy for the innovators and for the researchers in the country. In fact, another area which is very gray area is the IPR, registration and IPR. In India is one of the country which has only the resident patent filing is only 20 or 30%. I think that need to go up very much, and therefore the universities and the national they must create an ecosystem where people, researchers, are motivated to go for patenting along with the research papers, and not just there's some amount of capacity building part also is very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. I think your message is loud and clear that innovation should start early, and by the time they come to the university, then they should be ready to contribute to some kind of startup. So I think that's a good message that you have given. We would like to hear from Mrs. Amita Sharma now.
Sorry. All right, sorry. This is something very dear to my heart. So I've had some experience of the way the curriculum operates and is fashioned in IITs, which is not where I belong, but I've had studied it. So here are my few. What I completely agree with my peer speaker, that that you need to start very early at the school level. I have in fact spent 30 years of my career only working on education, right from the primary school level up to the higher education level. And the thirst and appetite for a natural instinct for innovation in terms of creativity is amazing. It's just that, as somebody earlier said, logical practices alienate that instinct for innovation. So there are very many pedagogical innovations that are actually being carried out in the country, both within the public system and outside it. And I think a very clear documentation of it would be worthwhile by any Center for Continuing Education also, and would be worth it. The second point I want to make here is that there is a lot of knowledge locked into verticals. So the verticals are very rich in their knowledge, but they're not harvested. They don't reach, and their reach gets limited. They almost become like bureaucratic silos. And one of the reasons for that is because they lack the lateral connect. Now it is possible to build institutional mechanisms for lateral connection, and that is one of the challenges that students at IITs ought to be exposed to from a very early age. It isn't enough to have a great idea. But first of all, you need to be able to map the diversity, inequality, opportunities in different terrain. This is a vast and diverse country. So I think a lot of exposure to students to different field practices is very important. And at the undergrad level, 1, 2. Within the curriculum, there are huge divisions. I was quite amused talking to IIT Pranav and Narega. I used to ask the IIT civil engineering professors, and someone admitted that to me, that all the subject matter they teach are like engineering method with very heavy carbon footprint. And actually, the sustainable method becomes some kind of a niche. Okay, you're into sustainability, you're not mainstream engineer. You're somebody out there, but not really mainstream. So the curriculum needs to be reviewed by a sort of a climate change perspective to see how across the range of engineering methods, they're actually integrating climate concerns and climate adaptive methods. This is one, or rather this is two. The third thing I noticed was silos even within the IITs. We talk of interdisciplinarity, but there is no interdisciplinarity actually in the curriculum. So not only do the students have no connect with the field, they have no exposure even to each other. I mean, like different wings don't see. I had a very hard time. I ran a course with CUs on kind of, I make them understand how to look at a very complex lens at an issue. The solution changes because you're looking at it, because the problem definition becomes different. So students need to be trained on ethnographic methods, on understanding the problematic, and that's a very different method of teaching than the one that is followed right now. So this is disciplinary, late reversibility. The third thing I want to emphasize here is, or maybe I've already done that, a lot of exposure to policy practice actually on the field, not just lectures by eminent policymakers who come to IIT Bombay for eminent guest lectures, but actually understanding the mess there as well. And that helps everybody get clarity. You have to create a bit of chaos to allow order to reorganize itself. And I think that disruption in the way you think will then lead to disruptive innovation. So there's a lot to learn from some American. Yeah, one last thing. I think we need a lot of demystification, and this is an argument I've had with a lot of eminent professors. This whole thing about modernity versus tradition. This is false science, this is true science. I think a lot of this is advocates on both sides are uninformed when they make very extreme statements and create biases. I know for one thing that in Narega, for example, the best traditions of water conservation in Karnataka or Rajasthan, you've all heard Anupam Mishra's TED Talks, were actually lost and had to be revived. So a lot of the work in Narega was reviving traditional methods of water harvesting or afforestation. And that's not necessarily, but it's like flipped askance by sort of mainstream engineers, and becomes poor methods for poor people. And so long as you have an inequitable grammar, which is these are frugal technologies for impoverished communities, you'll never get to the real solutions. So we need to have the curriculum is the best way to address these issues. That's it.
Thank you, Mrs. Sharma. And I think both of you have given some food for thought. So thank you so much. Over to you, Chandra, for the next question.
Thank you, Sridhar. So we're moving on and reaching perhaps the last couple of questions. This one is, of course, to Dr. Jatin Singh and to Professor Auroop Ganguly. So we've recently seen the emergence of both weather as well as energy services companies in India. And so there's definitely a need for scientific tools for prediction, assessment, and policy support. So what might you suggest as priority entrepreneurship opportunities in this area? Dr. Jatin Singh, please.
Ma'am, thank you for addressing me as a doctor. Actually, I'm not a doctor and neither am I a student of science. So thank you. I'll pick on something that is very controversial because it has been part of my professional life. Dr. Akhilesh Gupta is there. You see, our government scientific organizations like the IMD, like the CWC, like ISRO, like all, we don't have an agriculture equivalent, but we have IRI, but agri is a more private sector driven activity, are sitting on a lot of data and they're not really sharing it with each other, let alone with entrepreneurs and private sector people. And in this, I would like to take the example of the Ministry of Agriculture, especially the Mahanobalist Crop Forecasting Center, that for PMFAY for the past couple of years has brought in everybody, including international players, onto the table, funded research to solve a national problem of changing the way that we get agri statistics. Now that's a novel approach. I'm not even sure if it was successful, but the fact is they tried something well beyond the psychological comfort of the civilian scientific community. I would really like to see that in other places. That's because otherwise all of us have to reinvent the wheel. I don't need 7,000 sensors, but I needed to do that because I did not have access to the IMD data, and there is no way for me to do it. As same for forecasting, historical data, cadastral maps, though that is not a site, that's a State Department issue. Now the new mapping policy has mandated that a lot of this, work, I'm talking about geospatial data because that is one kind of data where kind of everything fits in. If you widen the definition of it, is game for economic opportunity. But I'm not sure if in spirit it is going to be accepted. Thank you.
Interesting ideas for the way ahead. And Professor Ganguly, would you share your thoughts as well?
Certainly, Chandra, and thanks for asking. So, a couple of points here. One is when we think about...
I'm wondering if you're muted, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, no, that's all right.
Can you hear me? Okay. So I think, first of all, thanks for giving me an opportunity to answer part of this question. So a couple of things here. When we think about entrepreneurship, there is obviously the technology, but there's also the incentive structure. And I think a few panelists mentioned about where some of the government incentive structures might be. And we have to realize that while India is the third largest producer or the third largest emitter in terms, of greenhouse gases, it's also around 120 out of 200 countries in terms of per capita emissions. So we have to think about incentive structures from that perspective. And the late Professor Coimbatore Krishnarao Prahlad already talked about business opportunities at the bottom of the pyramid. I think it's imperative in India's context to look at especially the undervalued part of the bottom of the pyramid. So whether it's problems that are, for example, rural in terms of the day-to-day problems faced by farmers, whether it's problems that are urban, such as loss of lives from emergencies and weather exigencies in the slums. And also in terms of the solutions, I think in addition to looking at the scientific, if you will, scientific predictions, since this question was about prediction and forecasting, in addition to looking at scientific prediction, we really have to look at predictive technologies and decision support systems at the interface of complex natural and human systems. So whether it is climate infrastructures settlements in the context of preparedness to disasters, weather-related disasters, whether it's decision support systems for farmer sustainability that includes, but is not limited to seasonal climate, but includes things like financial issues, societal issues. There are network-based systems, there are agent-based systems, there are participatory models which take human stakeholders and citizens into the loop. So these kinds of things needs to be considered. Coming back a little bit to incentives, one is government incentives. And of course, in a country like India, there has to be those kind of incentives, especially to address the core adaptation and over time mitigation challenges. I would suggest that initially India may need to focus on very much on adaptation, but over time it's the poorer segments and the most vulnerable population who will face the brunt of what is going to happen. So mitigation is also important. Also from a private sector, many of the businesses will have to target companies, business to business. And there we have to think about what drives business operations to make an enterprise successful, whether it's for profit or whether it's not for profit, it has to be financially viable. So from any company's perspective, there are two Harvard Business School professors who I think coined these phrases. Companies would look at these problems as either what they call inside out or outside in, meaning whatever these companies do, how do they impact climate? So Amazon runs their data centers, and that has implications for carbon footprint. And they would like, at least in view of their brand image, to try and reduce that. And outside in is things that are happening because of climate. Let's say, for example, whether it's floods, their impact on real estate, or, whether it's the impact on insurance, reinsurance, whether it's the impact on supply chain in the context of retail industries. So these are things happening, whether it's weather extremes, whether it's water stress and its impact on energy sector, things happening because of climate that will impact businesses, and these businesses might want to be resilient. So the technologies are there in variety of ways, not just prediction of the natural system, but at the interface of complex natural systems. I don't have time to go into all of those, but I'll be happy to if there is an interest. But these needs to be then targeted and aligned with the incentives structures, both from private, public sector and government sectors, as well as the business to business sectors, if you will. Thank you, Chandra.
Okay, thank you very much. And now over to Sridhar for the last question here, and then we go on to the panel. So Sridhar.
Yes, Chandra, thank you. So before we go to the audience for question and answer, there is this one last question, which is to Dr. Amir and Dr. Aditi. So could you both pinpoint some immediate areas where our young students and researchers could make an impact? Because I'm sure they are all bubbling with enthusiasm about contributing to this area of climate science and policy. So for their benefit, could you maybe specify some of the marketing strategies that could be implemented for a successful startup in the area of climate and sustainability? Especially given the challenges that we have with prediction, mitigation, and adaptation that we just discussed in the course of this panel discussion. So maybe we can start with Dr. Amir. And on a side note, Dr. Amir, I think we would also like to hear from your co-panelist, that is your daughter, and who everybody loved seeing her on the screen. So over to you.
Yes. I don't know what to say, but
there she is again. Good.
We have had such experiences, so she has not left my side ever since. Let me speak. Yeah. Well, in this to your question, I don't know how to identify or respond to these things, because there are a lot of things, and Aditi will also complement or supplement. I think I'll talk about 2 or 3 things that I feel important. Like, there may be a grand or good idea. The question is, how do we think about the product or service that is being conceptualized? And therefore, the challenge there is that, okay, and as I highlighted in my earlier intervention, is that what's the potential of that product or service to contribute to risk reduction of multiple forms? Like, so we know that there are multiple kinds of risks people in societies and systems face, and the viability of a product or a service idea will be in terms of its potential to address all these aspects. But the challenge there is and other panelists also identified was to very systematically and very robustly identify what the vulnerability is. So identifying the problem becomes very important, and how those vulnerabilities are connected to key systems, and how those systems and vulnerabilities are getting getting reinforced in some ways. And that kind of leads us to the idea around a product or a service that we are conceptualizing. So in my mind, I think this question of understanding what the problem is, what the nature of the problem is very important, and how that problem is unfolding in a context which is changing on a daily basis. And therefore, my proposition there is that whatever idea or whatever business or a startup idea is being conceptualized or drawn up, when you think of a team, think of an interdisciplinary team. Have a sociologist, have an anthropologist, have a psychologist, have an engineer, have a humanities person, have an economist, as diverse as possible from a resource point of view. And I think that's a very important key, because that will define, or that will be the make or break moment, and that's where we are heading. Because in my knowledge, or in terms of my capacities, I think there's a lot of ground to cover in terms of building a comprehensive assessment about around what the problem is, because there are multiple axes that are colliding and changing in a very rapid environment. That's my one thing, one suggestion. And the second suggestion is that basically, and this is kind of an untapped area, I think, and there are some success stories in this space. There's a lot of potential in terms of indigenous knowledge that exists in society, particularly in forest areas and in dryland areas, in like resource-constrained agricultural settings. There's a lot of potential there in terms of collaborating with those knowledge keepers and knowledge kind of aggregators or knowledge locations, in terms of not only helping them kind of institutionalize that knowledge, but also helping others benefit from the knowledge that exists in those societies and in those contexts, because that knowledge has served them for years and centuries. And I think there's no need to kind of contest the robustness and effectiveness of that knowledge that exists. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Bazaz.
Yes.
So over to Dr. Aditi.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'll keep it very brief. Your question here is what could make an impact? So what could make an impact is, I'll come back to say that serving the underserved rural population would make a real impact into the lives of people, because that's where we are going to feel the impacts of the climate change the most. I mean, of course, we'll feel that in urban areas also, but it's just that the rural vulnerabilities are so high. I think that's where the future entrepreneurs need to figure out what is the demand for services from the rural areas. This could be, services such as, I have seen, and I think also Amir was also talking about the same thing, just the lack of information. There is this understanding that, okay, there are issues with soil fertility, but where do I go and get my soil tested in a cheap way? I mean, the universities are just not enough. I mean, that kind of services, okay, I need services around weather information. Where can I get it in an affordable way? And that's where entrepreneurs can perhaps invest quite a lot. Even some things like, there are these multiple government schemes that Dr. Gupta and others have talked about, but very often this lack of knowledge about where to go to take benefits of those schemes, to where to go to get benefit of the subsidies. So basically demystifying some of those. Demystifying groundwater. I mean, that groundwater is not an infinite resource. It is a finite resource, and the relationship between groundwater and recharge. So there are these lots of unknowns that kind of are there with our farmers. And this is where I think startups can work. What I'm not entirely clear about the marketing strategy and the profitability of these enterprises. Let us not forget that farming as it is not a very profitable occupation right now, and it needs subsidies, and then there are a whole lot of issues. So would the entrepreneurs make money out of providing these services? That's where I don't have a clear answer. But from an impact perspective, I'm very clear that serving our underserved farmers is what's critical, and moving sizable population out of agriculture. And what would also be very important underpinning, and there I completely agree with Amir about a very interdisciplinary team, is whatever be your product, whatever be your services, it doesn't matter, in the sense there's a huge market for a lot of these things. But what's important is to keep in mind those basic tenets of equity, justice, and gender. Climate change is not a carbon issue, actually. Climate change is an equity and justice issue. So if your services and your products don't serve the underserved, don't serve the people who have been most negatively impacted, perhaps those have a limited kind of utilization. So I will bring in those social aspects and who you are serving very much into the protocol. Having said that, I think because these would be entrepreneurs, they have to be profit. That's where, yeah, that's a big question mark, if serving agriculture would be profitable. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Aditi. So I think that actually sets a very good platform for some interesting question and answer sessions. So we will. So there have been a few questions. So I'll just pick 2 or 3 from the questions that the attendees have put up, and after that we'll have a closing statement from all the panelists. So although those questions were targeted to a particular panel member, but I think after the panel member speaks, others can jump in as well. They can also give their thoughts. So this first question is targeted to, for Dr. Akhilesh Gupta, and I think it's rightly so, because in the course of this discussion, we have seen that the role of government is highly important, especially in setting up entrepreneurships, and how to channelize things from the government to let us say, the startup. So in that line, the question to Dr. Akhilesh Gupta is, will it be a good idea to set up a climate incubation cell at various institutions where the faculty and students can work together and lead a future startup, and also connect with different people to kind of engage on a problem and find a solution with the help from the government? Dr. Akhilesh Gupta, can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Caesar. So, yeah, I think in fact I mentioned in my intervention that now we are in fact planning to have thematic, incubators, and startup, which we never had. We had always some kind of randomly chosen theme. But we can go for those things. And some of the areas that are now emerging in the climate, in fact, as I mentioned, renewable is one area which is very much important. Electric vehicle is one area now. In fact, in the electric vehicle also, some of the area like battery. In fact, battery is going to be a big issue because the lithium-ion battery that we have right now in the thing, the size is very large. They are very heavy, and the most important thing is that they are not recyclable, and also they are not suited for tropical areas. So definitely this is going to be a new entrepreneurship in this area. And now like sodium ion might be replacement to this. And so this battery is going to be, and also it's a charging issue, and other issues are. So some innovation is needed in even power electronics. Motor is also in the area where so much is innovation is really needed. Even in the solar also, the capacity, battery capacity and all is a very big issue, and India need to evolve some good technology for that. So this is another area. In the adaptation, of course, the area like agriculture, water, health, and all are going to be very critical. So I think our plan is to go forward and use some better ideas to put things in for the students in the I say IITs and universities to come forward and take risks. So we have three kind of system that right now we use. One is a grant-in-aid. So the first stage, students, they want to avail the facility, we can give grant-in-aid. I think that is 10 lakh rupees, the money that is totally is given in the beginning. Then comes the loan. So we give a soft loan. We also have no provision for interest subvention scheme. And then comes the seed money. So we also give the seed money for taking it forward, can go up to 1 crore rupees. So there are TVIs already existing. As I said, 153 TVIs are already existing. But we are going to expand this network, and maybe more opportunity will come. Maybe this is going to be announced shortly. A new scheme that's called Prof, which will take up this extension plan, and it comprises of a combination of several things, as I mentioned, distributed, thematic, and virtual. Yeah, I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Anybody wants to add, or shall we go to the next question? Okay, so there is another. So this question was asked by Manas Behra, the previous question. Now this question, there are two people who have. So I'll connect these two questions because they are related. So this was asked by Shubhimal and Amit Sinha. And this is mainly asked to Dr. Ganguly and Mr. Jatin Singh. So the question is that since you have been successful in setting up a startup in the area of climate and weather, and which are doing very well, both the companies, could you highlight for the benefit of the students and the researchers the steps that you followed in setting up the companies and the problems that you faced and how did you overcome? This will be useful to the students is what we feel. And as a follow-up question to this towards Dr. Ganguly is that what contrast do you see when you compare India and US in the entrepreneurship attitude in the area of climate studies?
Oh, I'll take. Can I answer this?
Yes, please. It's it is asked for you and Dr. Ganguly. So both of you can.
I'll take the second question first. When I started my business, the institutional setup treated me like a criminal. So that is the first big difference. That is, I wouldn't say I get that same meted out the same treatment, but now there is indifference. So that is the first acceptance that this is a commercial nature and things should be done and you should be open and things should be given away for free. For instance, NOAA gives. I could not have done my business had NOAA not made data available. That is the kind, as in not only data available, the WRF source code is made available for weather forecasting. I mean, there is a big difference. I think only now we're kind of edging that institutional setup. The second, the process of setting up a company is fairly straightforward. I'm not sure that what people are asking. I think if I'm successful, I don't think so, not to the level that I should be, still trying. But the key thing is persistence. I think for any entrepreneur, success is basically a function of persistence. And that when things are going well, you should be in the middle of things, and things are going bad, you should again be in the middle of things because things will get better. I guess if you really ask me, the core success of a climate business in India to me was that India is a federated country and there are multiple levels of governance and corporates that want your services. I think that allows for differential ways of perceiving your services as opposed to a single point. That has really helped me. For example, if Ministry of Earth Sciences was indifferent, but Ministry of Agriculture gave me an embrace. State governments allowed me to set up sensors, which allows them to do forecasting, agri-advisory, and it became a part of the official statistical series. So that really absolutely helped me. I should also mention that I was blessed by complete fate by dealing with a gentleman whom I think is the father of Indian modern meteorology, Mr. D.R. Sikka, whom I think should be at least be given some kind of honorary doctorate, who taught me about the monsoon. So that actually went very far, and still, educated somebody who basically comes from an arts and humanities background.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Professor Ganguly, would you like to add your thought?
Certainly. So I saw this question from Suimal, and since this was in the chat, I tried to answer it in short in the chat, but I'll just go over some of the key points here. So I will talk from the perspective of an academician. I mean, I have actually had a slightly non-traditional path compared to academics. I've been in the private industry, I've been in a government national lab, and now I'm in academia. But still, from academia, the process that we go through as we start a business, and I think that was the initial question that you asked. So first of all, standard mechanisms in this country, at least these days, such as National Science Foundation, and in India, the equivalent, of course, would be DST, and I'm glad we have Dr. Akhilesh Gupta here. But these mechanisms are starting to encourage going into various diverse areas, whether it's broader impacts on society or whether it's what they call the innovation ecosystem or entrepreneurship. So that gives a very good starting points for our students and for our postdocs and for us, frankly. So that's just, the focus there is on science and technology, but the idea is that you also build products. So we built patents, actually, a couple of them. And based on each of them, then we said, okay, maybe, in some cases, the business processes may be aligned. So let's start thinking about that. One other thing that we have here in this country, and I'm sure there are equivalents in India, but others might be more, maybe able to comment more appropriately. We have here in the US this program that's called SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research. So these SBIR programs exist from NSF, but also from other agencies such as Department of Defense and so on. And NASA, for example. So what we did is after we had a fairly large NSF project on climate and sustainability, we sort of developed technologies as part of that, including a patent. But then we went for an NSF SBIR. When I say we, it's primarily my former PhD student, Dr. Evan Quadra, and I. Both of us, along with a third student from Northeastern in computer science, we co-founded RISC, the company, RISQ. So, so we went for that, and there, to some extent, at least, you have to start balancing the technological innovation with business and societal priorities. And I think that's something that's incredibly important. Technology is immensely useful. The novelty in technology, or at least the novelty in the adaptation of technology, is extremely useful, but so are the priorities. And if you're thinking about climate and sustainability startups, it's important to stick to the message up to a point. There could be some other, in some cases, I would say, distractions, but they're not really. I mean, but which you could easily veer towards areas which take you away from climate and sustainability. So from that side, to the extent there is some element of a desire to make a societal impact, which was very much there in, my students, for example, it helps create a longer term perspective. At the same time, you have to have this desire to make this business financially viable. Again, whether it's for profit or not for profit. And what that means is that we need to continuously learn and realign what we are trying to do. So we need to balance the technology innovation that's happening and the societal and business needs, and continuously realign. And that is what, to some extent, we have been doing when we thought of the real estate sector, and we spoke with variety of potential customers, funders, etc., and stakeholders in the real estate market. And there was a gap that collectively was identified, which is that ratings agency and bond issuers and, they sort of operate in a little bit of vacuum. The climate analysis, which needs to inform both of them independently, is not there, and which led to some sort of incestuous situation where bond issuers were talking to ratings agencies, and they should really be independent. So what happened, all said and done, after a lot of discussions, what happened is within that real estate market, in that exchange, risk was embedded into one exchange.
Could I ask
so
you to?
I'll stop here and hello.
Yes.
Oh, so I'll stop here just to say that there's a need to balance both of these sides, the technological innovation and the business and societal priorities.
Okay, thank you so much for those interesting thoughts. I mean, we have more questions, but I think due to the lack of time, we would have to stop here, and we would like to get some closing statements, 1 minute closing statements from all the panel members, maybe less than 1 minute if it is possible. So I would request all the panel members closing statement. Hello.
Yeah, we are all here. Do you want to suggest?
We will. So we can go alphabetically. Maybe we'll start with Dr. Akhilesh Gupta, and then Dr. Akhilesh Gupta, then Mrs. Amita, followed by Professor Ganguly, and Dr. Amir, Mr. Jatin, and Dr. Aditi. So in that order, if you can give the closing statements, that would be very beneficial.
Yeah, thank you. I think I would say that, I think there is a huge opportunity waiting for entrepreneurs and innovators to start to work on this area and take up this as their career. So there's with the kind of risk that that is associated with this, the government is coming forward with a lot of opportunities. Students must take up these opportunities and come forward and invest into this kind of grant opportunity that are coming forward. In fact, I must tell this thing that there is in the last about 4 or 5 years, the technology business incubators could set up nearly 4,000 startups under DST program, and with the investment of just 2,000 crore in last 5 years, 4 years, we could create a wealth of 28,000 crore. And with there, and as many as 70,000 new jobs were created in a cumulative direct employment, and nearly 2,000 intellectual property was generated. So government is seeing advantage in going forward. With little investment, they find so much of wealth, national wealth that can be generated, and a lot of jobs can be created. So I would say that I think this is a win-win situation both for government and the entrepreneurs to work together. And government in the new science and technology policy is bringing out some big plan. And I didn't have time to say all the things, but there are so many incentivizations that include new patent law, new patent regime.
Can we ask you to wrap it up, because I think we are running out of time.
With that, thank you very much. I think it was a great opportunity for me to be part of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Sharma, you want to take maybe 30-40 seconds to give a closing statement?
We need to focus on the vulnerable groups. Solutions have to be legible and affordable to them. Therefore, it might be worthwhile to look at natural climate solutions. That's the first part of problem solution matrix. The other is what can we do? What is really an ecosystem for entrepreneurship? It really consists of a combination of a solution technology, that's knowledge, and policy, and the community user group. How can you prepare entrepreneurs and academic institutions? By having a truly interdisciplinary curriculum, not just different kinds of engineering methods, but also socioeconomic, and a ear to the ground policy and its transformative effect or its impediments. So you unlock the verticals into mutual relationships at the knowledge level. This will help students convert their knowledge into technology innovations. They'll also be able to engage with institutional mechanisms that are important for them, both political, economic, and social, so that they can then transfer their knowledge and identify, where the needs are. But I think one of the points that came up was, is it profitable to work at the, grassroots level with the poor? The poor have no paying power. That's really not very true. I mean, anybody who's worked with the poor communities knows that they look for appropriate and feasible solutions. And if you actually communicate with them with the cost-benefit analysis of present, medium, and long-term gains, they are the ones who adopt it because they are the ones who have very little choices. So can we look at a combination of technology and knowledge entrepreneurship in collaboration with communities and policymakers? I think that's the way to go. That's not saying anything very new, but I think that's the right way ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Sharma. Professor Ganguly, maybe 40 seconds, please.
Yes.
Really
so,
thank you.
No, absolutely. So I would end with a direct message to the entrepreneurs of the future, the students and others here. Climate change has been called the greatest challenge of our generation, but our generation has failed yours. The impacts will be disproportionately felt by your generation. So please take leadership and show the so-called leaders of the world that it is possible to build economic prosperity and develop viable businesses without compromising on societal resilience and loss of biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that was well put. Dr. Amir, you want to take some 30-40 seconds to give your final conclusion?
Yes. So first of all, thank you for having me here. It was also a learning experience for me listening to other co-panelists. My advice is something that Aditi also talked about, is I think entrepreneurs, technologists, future business tycoons, they have to be mindful of two aspects. One is that it's a long game, so it's an iterative process. So you go into the marketplace, but you have to continuously iterate, be mindful of the iteration process, because it's all about discovery, and that discovery will take time. And B, I think spend a lot of time on the drawing board, thinking about your theory of change and the pathways to impact. Okay, what's the channel? What's the mechanism? Who are the agents and actors? The more you spend time on this, the better the outcomes will be. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Aditi, you are the last, and we would close with an impactful thought.
So I think I'll repeat what I have already said. Whatever be your business idea, and there's no dearth of it. There is so much of need for entrepreneurial work in all the sectors. But I think for a business to succeed in this new environment of climate change, it can't be all about profit. So keep equity, justice kind of at the center of your business ideas. I know that is not how traditionally business have worked, but perhaps to move to a world that is a better world, and as Professor Ganguly said, we are actually leaving behind a worse world for our young generation. So maybe they have to really change the rules of the games and think of it differently. So I would put equity and justice at the heart of their business plans.
Yes, completely agree on that. So thank you for all those thought-provoking discussions. May I request Professor Raj to close the session?
Yeah.
Sir, yeah, before we close this session with vote of thanks, I would request all attendees and all panelists to please switch on their videos. We would like to take a group photograph.
Sorry, I forgot to mention that Mr. Jatin Singh had to leave because he had some other meeting at 7 p.m. So that's why he couldn't give his closing statement. Sorry about that.
So I'll just quickly take a photograph. Huh?
Should I start?
Yes, sir. Raj, sir, please.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you, sir.
before finally giving the vote of thanks, first of all, I'd like to apologize for the initial technical glitches, which delayed our program by 30 minutes. I'm sorry. Yeah, and first I'd like to thank the DST SPLICE program for funding us the IDP program, and also all the eminent panelists, Dr. Akhilesh Gupta, Mrs. Amita Sharma, Prof. Auroop Ganguly, Dr. Amir Bazaz, Mr. Jatin Singh, and Dr. Aditi Mukherji, who readily accept our invitation and also gave a very wonderful and thought-provoking discussions, because it really helped, I think, many students and other young researchers who attended, I think, benefited from your talk. Which discussed about the entrepreneurship challenges, also what are the curriculum activities we need to upgrade, interdisciplinary nature, all. So first, thank you all for the panelists. And also I'd like to thank our convener, Professor Subimal Ghosh, IDP, Climate Studies, Professor Chandra Venkatraman, and Professor Sridhar Balasubramaniam, who have nicely framed the questions and moderated this session very well. And also like to thank Ms. Sheba, who helped in publicity activities. And finally and not least, I thank all the attendees also who attended this panel discussion. I hope you all benefited from these discussions. So I would like to mention here that these proceedings will already recorded, which will be shared in YouTube maybe in 1 or 2 days. And also, before closing, I'd like to mention one more thing. As a part of the panel discussion series, we are going to have a follow-up panel discussion on 24th March, Wednesday next week. It is from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. The topic of the panel discussion is on climate resilient engineering design. I hope you all will register for those discussion also and benefit from the talks from the panelists. Thank you very much. And have a good day.